Thank you all for coming. It's getting to be late in the day. Hopefully we will give you a program that will get your blood going a little bit, and we'll all move and think not just with our heads, but with our bodies a little bit, because we are talking about a new program we're starting at the college that is about arts integration and embodied learning. It's about really bringing the arts into core subject areas. As an alumni myself, and we are all, I believe in this room, all deeply engaged in our history with TC, this was an important year for me. This is my 20th year since I first came to TC. I did my master's here 20 years ago, and then taught middle school in New York City schools for 7 years, and then came back here to bring some of the things that I'd created in my middle school classroom and start incubating them at the center that we're going to talk to you about. I met my wife. Actually, I met my wife in my first class at TC. We sat down next to each other. And in that building right there, I lived for a number of years when I was a doctoral student. And when I would teach classes, I could wave from the class out to my daughters as they were going to sleep. So I've been affiliated with the college for a long time, and really care about the community and what it does to continue to engage alumni in being active creators of educational change. Very proud to be presenting with both Adele and Andrea. Adele was my student as a master's student 10 years ago, probably. And now I am humbled by her teaching, and I actually feel like I learned probably more from her than she learns from me. Andrea is a recent collaborator, came to our summer program last summer as a teaching artist, and right away became kind of a visionary in thinking about how we push this work forward. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, actually, I thought I would just kind of evoke the voice of Maxine Greene, because Maxine Greene has been such an influence to so many of us at the college, but to this program especially. To tap into imagination is to become able to break with what is supposedly fixed and finished, to carve out a new order of experience. Doing so, a person may become free to glimpse at what might be, to form notions of what should be and what is not yet. And as today we're talking about a new program that we're starting, but also a very particular technique that we're starting to work with, which we call performative inquiry. This becomes a great time for launching that. So a little bit of context. The Center for the Professional Education of Teachers, it's a legacy center at the college. This is its 14th year. It's founded by Ruth Innes, who is the Morse, the Enid and Lester Morse Professor of Education. She holds an endowed chair and founded the center. The center is very unique in a number of ways because it hasn't created a body of work or research to take into the world. It takes TC students, TC doctoral students and master's students, and incubates ideas, and takes what we talk about is the slow punches that are formed out of our classroom experience, those ideas that grow out of our own teaching that then we bring to the college and think about how might this function in teacher education, not just in direct service environments. Over the years, CPET has launched many, many projects. Student Press Initiative is one that I founded 13 years ago that grew out of my own classroom practice. I was publishing with students and really seeing how student publication, classroom publication, fired kids up like nothing I'd seen before. Really helped them understand what writing for an audience and connecting to the world meant. But it's just one of many, many programs. Over the years, over the last 14 years, CPET has collaborated with over 1,100 schools around the world. Impacted, conservatively, over 500,000 students. And this is a number that is really important to me because it's kind of where my heart is in the TC side of this work. We've worked with over 650 TC students. And when I say worked with, that could mean an internship that lasts a year, or it could mean a doctoral student coming to the center right as they begin their doctoral studies, staying 4 years with us, and then staying on. Right now, we're working with over 40 TC students, anywhere from full-time capacity, where they're in full-time fellowships, to very part-time internships. Impacted, I'll show you a few of the faces. Some of them are 650. What I really want to convey about what CPET does and has done is that it's not just a place where doctoral students, master's students come to us and learn from us. It's a place where they bring their experiences and their expertise, and it becomes part of our collective knowledge. CPET has always resisted one-size-fits-all thinking. A lot of professional development organizations say, this is what we've got. Here's our program, here's our curriculum, and they take it out. Much easier to scale that way. Our work has always been about a deep respect for and understanding that context is what drives education, real education. Our doctoral students, our master's students come together with expertise, learn from us and with us, and teach us as well. We bring those things out to schools. The center has a deep appreciation, I think, a deep respect for the idea that teachers have, we have a deep respect for the professional capacity of teachers. That's to say, we don't ever bring curriculum and say, this is yours, carry it forward, do what we say, but we sit down at the table and we listen to what their needs are and what they bring, what their expertise is. Our newest project, and this is what we're going to be talking about and playing with a little bit today, is Performance at the Center. Performance at the Center, Adele and I have been working with some of these ideas for the last, I would say probably 5 years, formally, but each of us growing out of our classroom experience. I'm not going to read any of that to you. I'm just going to tell you what we do right now, a couple key elements of the work. Performance of the Center is immersive teacher education through performance. It's a really unique model. I'm very proud of this, even though it's, at this point, still hybrid. We do summer institutes, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a few minutes. Very, very unusual, where we immerse teachers and students as collaborators. We do school residencies. We bring this work out to schools, and we do workshop series where we bring teachers here to learn in this process. Early iterations. Adele and I started a program 5 years ago called Writers on Stage, where students, both of us, come from the world of English education. Andrea comes from music education, and this really is about cross-disciplinary collaboration in the arts. In English education, Adele and I were both very interested in what happens when you study a text, when you read a text to create out of it. When you're looking for the gaps and spaces in the text, you're looking for those pieces where questions linger, where there aren't solid answers, and then you engage your questions, your understandings, your interpretations through performance for an audience. So Writers on Stage, for a few years, we brought students from around the city to perform novels, where they would immerse in a single literary text, creating pieces of performance, and then ultimately, in a very messy and collaborative process, putting together a script and staging it for an audience of black box theater. Here's a very short film that gives you a sense of where this has come, because there we were thinking about this as a direct service program. What does it mean to do this with students? Our big shift now is that we're thinking about it as a teacher education program, where we're engaging in the work with students, but learning from and with them. But our real goal is teacher education, because we're bringing teachers in as performers to engage in this as well.
Right now we are grand experiment to see what happens when we bring in teachers and students together as equals and explore a text through remix. So using this found text of Frankenstein to create something new.
Just describe it as this place where you can come and collaborate with others on a book that you would otherwise have just read in English class for
what this is for me as a teacher is it's a statement about the importance of creativity in the classroom.
So today was the first day. It was a lot of fun.
The first day, we said, we put the number on the board, we said 14,085 minutes to go.
They started explaining and showing us how to use movement to tell a story, and to take a word or a phrase or an idea and express that through our band. Your dad's for me!
This book is what is going to help us come together in this sense. There's no better book to start on.
My name is Andrea Bonamico, and my role here today was to help players access their voices as instruments.
I think it's fascinating that you're moved by the singing, because what life experiences have you had?
We've been generating ideas for, I guess, 5 or 6 days now. Tomorrow we're going to start rehearsals. And then Wednesday we have again rehearsals. Thursday is dress rehearsal, and then we run it Thursday night.
This is about a learning process entire time, even as we get to stage.
I really wanted to touch people's lives, and I wanted to be some sort of an impact on people and see, oh, I never thought of Frankenstein in this way.
Who are the monsters?
Who is the real monster?
Who is the real monster?
Who is the real monster? Who is the real monster?
I'm thinking about how far have I seen people come? Who was kind of in a shell, who was maybe a little bit nervous about using their voice, using their body in a certain way, and I've seen them take infinite leaps and bounds in 8 days. That's what I'm excited for.
What you've been able to create in under 2 weeks is absolutely wonderful. And I'm so proud of everyone here, and I'm so proud to be part of this kind of creative generosity.
After 9 days of hard work, we are finally going to put on show our remixing of Frankenstein.
In the chapel right next door to me, there are going to be 26 players performing an original piece composed over the course of 9 days, inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I feel very excited. This is kind of
I don't feel nervous at all. I don't know why.
It was great to see people respond to the work that we had put together.
I'm just really proud. I'm nervous and I'm horrified. Still going very hard.
I think this kind of work has the potential to create a ripple. One teacher sees what another teacher has created, and rather than saying, oh, give me that lesson, they say, that's amazing, I want to try something like that.
For me, this is the beginning. I can't wait to take this back to Philadelphia.
This is an experience I will never forget.
It's not a conventional study of literature, probably. One of the things I like when I watch that is that it becomes tough to tell, I think, if you don't know these people, who's the student and who's the teacher. And that was part of our goal. Part of our goal was thinking, as this is as we see this as a project of teacher education, how do we create a destabilizing in some ways. And I mean that in a very positive way. A supportive destabilizing that can start to open people to a transformational learning experience. For the teachers going through this 2 weeks, we don't allow them to be. In fact, we actively ask them to resist being teachers. We tell them you are players, just like the students. If you feel the impulse to teach, to lead, please back off of it. You are a collaborator. At the end of the 2 weeks, the students leave. There are a fair amount of tears and hugs. And the teachers stay with us for an additional week because for them, this is a fellowship. They're coming together as fellows. It's a grant-funded project. And they do intensive curriculum design to bring customized curriculum back to their home schools that really think about arts integration in the core content areas. One of the other things is how high stakes this is in some funny ways. We think about high stakes as this very intensive evaluation. This is high stakes because they care about it a lot, because there's an audience. Most of them, Adele could speak better to this because this is the topic of her dissertation. Most of them talk about this as the most challenging project they've ever worked on in their lives. So that's the new body of work. We talk a lot about, for those of you who were in the morning session where I was talking about social innovation, I use a lot of metaphors. So I wanted to share a metaphor before we jump into study. And it's the metaphor of the flameria, which some of you may know. This is a fairly famous 19th century woodcut. And if you zoom in on it, what this is a man, a traveler, at the end of the known world. Back to their 19th century depiction of a traveler back when they believed the world was flat. But he has burst his head through. And that's an addition. I didn't actually have that. I like to play with these slides. The idea that he is bursting through. What we think is when we do these immersive, arts-based experiences, there's peeking through to the other side. And that's what we've seen so far. That so many of the teachers who are fellows who have done this have gone back and really transformed their curriculum. Really thinking about how does this work? Become not an addition, not an after-school club, not something to tax on, but an intellectually rigorous version of core curriculum.
All right, so what we'd love for you to do right now is just take a moment. I know many of you have already done a first reading of Teach and Story of an Hour, but just take about 5 minutes to read through Story of an Hour again, but this time with a pen in your hand, and just noting anything that stands out. So what stands out might be words, might be phrases, it could be reactions, questions, confusions, those gaps and spaces that Erick was talking about. So anything that stands out. Don't censor yourself.
And we promise we're not going to make you lay on the floor like you sound.
No. Now begin to bring that second reading to a close. When you feel like you're pretty much done, what I'd like you to do is just go back through and find one word or one short phrase that really stand out to you for some reason. And you can put a star next to it, or you can circle it, whatever you want to do to really make that stand out for you. And once you've chosen that word or phrase, just test it out for yourself. So you can say it to yourself. You don't have to say it on sound. If you want it to have sound, that's fine. But just in your chair, just say that word, let's say 5 times. That word or phrase 5 times. Okay? Just to yourself. And if you said it 5 times, just say it a couple more until you feel sure that you've memorized it, that word or phrase.
So I know that this open space in the center of the room is terrifying, especially after seeing that video. But I promise that the hardest thing that we're going to do is walk. And because I saw most of you come into this room, I have confidence that you can do that. So what we're going to do is, and this is just the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to get up in a moment and find anywhere in this space to stand. You want to make sure that you're not standing directly next to someone, so let's try to fill this whole space. And again, the hardest thing I'm going to ask you to do after that is walk. Okay? And you can leave your story behind. So just take yourself and find your own space in the room. There's some space up here, so come on up to fill the space. Great, you don't have to be facing anyone else, so if you'd like to face the window or a wall, that's fine. So what we're going to do in a moment is, as I promised, walk. But this is a special kind of walking called milling and seating. And all that means is that when you walk, you always have to walk through the center of the room to get to somewhere else. So you can't walk around the periphery of the room. Okay? So when I clap, all you need to do is walk. You need to make sure that you don't bump into anyone else. But if you don't bump into anyone else, then you have completely succeeded. All right? So when I clap, just start walking, and again, you're walking through the center of the room in order to get to wherever you want to get. Okay? Just start walking at your own pace. If you do bump into anyone, just smile, walk on by, look around the room, make sure that you're filling up the empty spaces. So just start to be aware of the space and see where you are in the space. And when I clap again, you're just going to come to a stop wherever you are. All right. And now, in this standing position, I just want you to think back to that word or phrase that you memorized so carefully when you were in your seat. So just think back to that word or phrase. And then when I clap again, I'd like a little whispered word to escape your parted lips. And that little whispered word is whatever you chose. So it's your word or phrase. A little whispered word escapes your parted lips. All right. And when I clap again, you're going to start walking, and you're just going to whisper that word over and over. You say it over and over again under your breath. And when I clap again, just come to a pause. All right, now I'd like you to look at someone across the room from you. That person doesn't have to be looking at you, just look at that person. And when I clap again, I just want you to call out that word or phrase to the person you're looking at. Again, it doesn't matter if they're looking at you. And keep walking. And pause. Now look at someone who's relatively close to you. And again, it doesn't matter if that person is looking at you. And when I clap again, I just want you to whisper that word to them. But make sure it gets to them. And walk. And now, as you're walking, feel free to greet people, but you're greeting them with your word or phrase. Just pause. And one more time, look across at someone way across the room, as far as possible from you. And you want to make sure they hear this word or phrase, so you're going to say it as loud as you possibly can. Great. And find your seat. moment to notice how you're breathing right now. The way we breathe and the way the air enters and exits our body has really a lot to do with how we express ourselves. And so I come to this program and I come to this work as a musician, as a singer, and as a vocalist. And what I learned about doing this work is that oftentimes I work with people who don't identify themselves as musicians, or the notion of having a performance at the center can sometimes be very scary. And so I came into this space feeling like, okay, well, I have this performer thing, but what am I doing? I don't know. I'm interacting with very oftentimes English teachers who are reading text maybe in a very different way than I do. The good news is what I learned is that really we're all looking at this text in very much the same way. And that as a musician, a vocalist, a singer, as an actor, I found that the way that I engage with this text works really for all of us. And a big part of that is about trying to identify with yourself, whether you are a musician, a social studies teacher, an art history teacher, but to say, okay, what do the words on this page say? What is this about? Who is this person? And what do I know about that? And so there really is no requirement to have studied music or singing or instrumental music in any way in order to be able to do that. So I'm going to just start by diving into a couple of little specific moments here in this text that help me understand a little bit about Louise and a little bit about maybe what she was experiencing physically, emotionally, and some transitions that happened for her. So maybe the first thing that we can do is step into this and bring our human selves into this moment where Louise goes to her room and she goes to her chair, because we're all in chairs right now, so we're going to make this work for us. Okay. Everybody put your papers down. I'm actually going to ask you to go toward the center of the room and face your chair. I'm going to read you a paragraph from the text, and I'm going to ask you then on the count of 3, or I'll use the same cue that Adele used. I'll use the clap. When I clap, I'm going to ask you to go to your chair, your seat, as though you are Louise in this moment, entering the room, finding your chair, and as I read the text, you'll have information, and that will tell you how you will sit down, how you will address your chair, and then we'll go from there. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Do you see your seat? Take a look at your chair. That's your comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. So on my cue, I'm going to clap. I'm going to ask you to move to that chair and try to embody those words. I'll read it one more time. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. So stay in that space, stay in that moment, and just check in with yourself. How does your body feel? What kinds of thoughts are going through your brain? How is that affecting your breath? How is the air entering your body and exiting your body? And what does this tell you about yourself, or a moment where you may have felt like this? Can you think of a time in your own world, in your own life, where you can relate to this feeling? Try to be as specific as possible. Okay, so stay in that space with yourself. I'm going to jump ahead to much later in the text. Later on in the text, Louise rises out of the chair. I'm going to read to you those words, and then we're going to play with that a little bit again. But for now, just stay in the space, hear the words that I'm saying, and I want you to consider how the way you rise out of the chair is different from the way you entered into the chair. Before she rises from the chair, this happens. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday that she thought with a shudder that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. So I'm going to read that again. I'm going to ask you to use the text as I read it to you as a transition for yourself to prepare to get out of the chair. And then ultimately you'll find yourself getting up out of the chair and walking around the room one more time. And just use the information from the text to help you figure out how you do that. What does it mean for you? How do you hear this text? And what do these words mean for you in your own specific relation to what's happening in the story? Okay, here we go. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. So you might be thinking, are you still sitting this way at this point in the story? Has your posture changed? Has your breath shifted and changed? Are you thinking about different things? Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday that she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. She rose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. Feel free to move around the room, and that's your space. So see what that means for you. How do you move around the room like a goddess of victory, somebody who's just won and overcome something? And how has this affected your posture? How has this affected the expression on your face? How has this affected your breathing? If you were to say something right now, just think about what you might say. Keep moving. Keep walking. What might you say if you had an opportunity right now? And ask yourself, is there a moment in your life, in your daily life, or one specific moment that you can go back to and think of, where you can say, yeah, I relate to this feeling. I know what this is about. Yeah, I've been here. I've been victorious. I've been the goddess of victory. Once before, I know what this is about. Can you think about that moment for a second? Just live in it. What do you know about that? And with that information, you can find yourself back to your seat as your normal own self. So the good news that somebody told me at one point in my life was that we all have the potential to be great actors. We all have the potential to be great actors. And that's because acting is not about pretending. Acting is about being. And so each one of you, in your very own way, just now engaged as an actor to say, what is this circumstance? What is this about? What do I know about that? And how do I bring my personal self into that space? You all just did it. It was beautiful. It was a fabulous performance. But so now what I'm sort of wondering, with those two bookends, right? What do those two bookends, those two moments, the entering of the chair and the exiting of the chair, what does that tell us about Louise and about this story and about what she goes through in between? What do we know? So I'm asking you now, based on what you just embodied and just lived through, you stepped into her shoes in a way, right? So I'm asking you now, what is it that we know about her in this very short story? What has occurred based on that information?
The sinking down is a reaction to the supposed death, symbolically, kinetically, and the rising up is her own resurrection.
She experienced a freedom when she realized that she was no longer captive to whatever that situation, her married life, that situation was. So for a moment, it was like this light that came on, this epiphany, so to speak, and the freedom was there.
Such an interesting word, captive. She was captive. Yeah.
I was going to say her identity is transformed, and it takes a few minutes for that to sink in. She sits and she sees this open window, and suddenly who she can be is not bound to this past and this person. And when it finally does sink in that the future is open to her, suddenly the past opens the door and it sucks it back in.
At first I thought she was older because it starts out with heart disease and starts out with a dead husband, and I took those to be signs of an elderly woman and also just like her deep exhaustion. But in reading back, the second time I noticed that it says specifically that she is young. And so I was really wrestling with whether or not she is extremely selfish, because there's that phrase, she would live for herself, and she's all about like not liking when someone else imposes their will upon you. But in a way, I think she's incredibly young and naive because she cannot see why you would ever give your own free time to someone else. And she ends up dying before she can experience either.
There was something kind of wicked about Louise. Like, she had this reaction that is not traditional. And so I just had this sense of like, this is a real sly character the whole time through.
Was there any information about her, this someone? It seems that there's a transformation that happens. Is there anything about that transformation that either validates what you're thinking from your first reading or changes what you were thinking?
Well, the moment where she's sitting in the chair and then she stands up, and that was the transition moment where you realize like, she's happy about this. And for the first couple of paragraphs, this is not something that someone should be happy about. So there's this like wickedness that comes on in that book.
What does Louise want?
I kind of always take this in historical context when you think about marriage as a social tool, where she's essentially young. I didn't think about that until you actually brought it up. And how she's married off at a young age. Clearly this is not a situation she wants to be in. And suddenly she's liberated from this contract that she doesn't want to be in, but because society says that she has to be married at this age, she's like, yes, I didn't have to do anything that would like damage my reputation. suddenly it's just taken away from her in an instant. And that's kind of my interpretation of it.
So we're gonna take there's a couple more minutes, if that's okay, a couple minutes. And I'm gonna just ask us to engage in, for the sake of this workshop, we're gonna jump into another way that we allow ourselves to get to know the circumstances and the characters by making a personal connection to what's happening. So we're going to use that entering the chair and the exiting the chair one more time. Now you've experienced that, and it might change, it might stay the same. But you, I believe, all got 2 pieces of paper on your way in, just 2 pieces of lined paper. So I'm going to ask you to just get those ready with a writing utensil. Can we just talk for 1 second? What is it that we think that Louise wants? What does this person want?
Well, I'm not sure she got to figure out what she wanted, right? I think that's one of the things about the story is that she's free and she imagines these possibilities, but before she can really she can think them through or act on any of them, her husband walks back through the door, and so it's just like just cut short and quick, and that's the shock, especially because that's a really vulnerable moment, right? When you admit finally what you actually. So that like you're like, oh, I have opportunities, like I can do anything, and you think you start to like hope and wonder, and then to see that gone so quickly. I'm not sure she got the chance to really understand what she wanted, just that she could want things.
But the dream, that moment that she was able to dream about it, was really significant to her. So, you know, after she realized that, oh my goodness, I can now live for myself, which, you know, I mean, we don't know the situation, but it seems that she felt that she's in an overbearing kind of situation. So now, here she is, a moment that she can do what she wants. Her time is her own. She does not have to consider anyone else. And so she's euphoric almost in that feeling.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we have this sort of overbearing situation. She's captive. She's being sort of stifled, right? Maybe oppressed. And then she finds this opportunity where she realizes that she might become free and that she has these dreams and aspires to possibilities, right? But there's an obstacle, or there has been an obstacle, right? And so typically when we engage in stories like this, there's something that we want, and there's an obstacle, and we have to figure out how can we achieve our objective, right? And how do we overcome those obstacles? What are the tactics that we use? Those are some of the things that we think about. So considering what does this person want, what is this circumstance? Oh, and what do I know about that? So for just 1 second, think for yourself. What do you know about being in a circumstance where you might be feeling captive? Or however you interpret her circumstance, right? Put yourself in that moment. What is that moment where you're feeling oppressed, captive, not able to dream, to realize possibilities? What is that moment for you? When has that been? And to give you an example, it could be the moment when you were 17 and wanting to go away to college, and maybe your parents didn't want you to go across the country and they wanted you to stay close. I'm just giving you an example, right? It doesn't have to be a life or death kind of a moment when we engage in these ideas. Okay? And then think for one more moment, if you weren't in that situation, if the obstacles were removed, what would be all the possible things that you could want to achieve and to aspire to? What would be all of those things that you would go after if you had the freedom? Okay, so placing your things down in your seat. Come to the center. And then the center. Great, turn and face your seat, just like we did before. See your chair? Now you guys know what to do. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this, she sank. Feel free to move at any point you need to. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. And while you're in this space, I would like for you to take one of those pieces of paper, and I would like for you to write about the obstacle, the thing that is oppressing you, the thing that is keeping you captive. And you're not writing as Louise, you're writing as yourself. It can be words, it can be a list, it can be a sentence, it could be a letter to the oppressor. Use your imagination. About 10 seconds to wrap that up. When you're done with that, you fold it in half. This process isn't really about telling secrets. It's about knowing what you know, finding out what you know, and finding a connection and relating to what's happening in the text. It's not about telling secrets necessarily. Okay? And this work, remember, can be therapeutic, but it ought not be your therapy. I'm not trained as a therapist. Okay, but here's your oppressor. Here's the thing that is keeping you captive. Here's your obstacle. Okay, now take your other piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, you get to write about your wildest dreams and all of the things that you imagine. All the things that you might find as possibilities if your obstacle were no longer in your way. While you're writing that, I'm just going to read you one more time this paragraph. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday that she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. As you're writing, just take notice too if you feel any differently right now as you're writing. If you notice that there's a different expression on your face, if your posture's changed, if your breathing is different. Where's your imagination taking you? And wrap that up in about 5 more seconds. And you're going to fold that up. You're going to put it away in your pocket. Now I'd like for you to take the other piece of paper, your obstacle. I would like for you to find somebody across the room, trade obstacles, rip their obstacle to shreds, and say, congratulations, your obstacle is gone. Go. Go destroy somebody else's obstacle.
That's it.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
And then find your way back to your seat.
Are you an actor?
Yeah.
Some of you are really demolishing them. Cool, then find your way back to your seat. And in your seats. Or we want to put them in the trash. Get rid of those. This is the last piece. Great, so your obstacles are gone. You know now for yourself, how have you engaged in this and how have you brought what you know to this circumstance? And if you were to stand and rise one more time at length and open the door and carry yourself unwittingly like a goddess of victory, you'd have this new information to do that with, right? Okay, well thank you for being brave and taking a risk and, thinking hard about yourselves and being a little vulnerable. I appreciate that. All right, so we did have something else planned, but because of time, we wanted to take some time at the end here to sort of unpack what you had just experienced. So if you could take a moment now, maybe just to think through the activities that you did. So if you remember, we started out just reading through the story. You read through it once, then we noted questions, gaps, reactions, words and phrases. Then you picked a word or phrase, and then we got up, we moved around, we did something with those words and phrases, you went back to your seats. Then we went through this whole sequence with sinking into the chair and then rising up out of it. So if you could just take a couple of minutes to turn to the people around you and just talk about what you experienced. So what do you think are some of the principles of practice behind that? Where do you see this work going in a classroom? What are the possibilities? All right, just take a couple of minutes and then we'll all share out.
This is definitely appropriate. I've done a lot of theater over the years. Stuff like this. You might need to adapt a little bit, but I think students love getting into character and walking around. We all think about it there. I've seen high schoolers and stuff play these types of games. I've seen adults play these types of games and do these exercises. Why? What are your thoughts on these two? Who do you think is the right age? Are you an educator or a student? What? Yeah, I'm a tutor. So it's not like that. And I've been working on a lot of field work with elementary schoolers.
The idea of
I did.
just getting people, most of us have never seen one before.
Yeah.
Getting
And having such an intimate
I mean, did you, so when you were did you feel that we were
so I don't know if you have anything similar, but that
We're just going to bring it back together because we'd love to hear from you. So, whatever you experienced just now, so things that came up for you, again, possibilities that you see for this kind of work in the classroom, or any questions that you have. So, anyone who'd like to start?
I think it's a great way to engage students in getting them to go through a range of emotions without it being a dangerous place for them to go. The only thing, maybe this is trust of people of a certain age, that we were worried about was the exchange at the end, that how many people will go like this, what? As opposed to ripping up the piece of paper from the other person. But everything else, maybe that's just me. But you know, you have to build that trust at first, and I don't know what age that trust comes at.
Which so much of this work is very deliberately designed to build trust, to believe that through risk-taking, through vulnerability in social settings, supported vulnerability, we actually start to build those environments of trust. Yeah, so that may not be a first-day activity of 12-year-olds.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I really liked about this is there's such a huge push for STEM education and using tech in classrooms that it takes a lot of movement to go through these. And so so much of it is pushing buttons, data, analytics, and really just step-by-step process. And it really gives you much more of a creative outlet to explore what you really want to learn, become more passionate about something other than what am I going to program in this class, and just kind of creatively looking at ways to take maybe technology in the classroom and apply it to your study.
Definitely. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts off of that. One is Erick had mentioned that this work is my dissertation, and one of the things that motivated me to really study this work in depth is because we had so many laptops coming into our classrooms, and I kept thinking, why are we even coming to class if all we're going to do is sit down and open up our laptops and not look at each other? And I said, I want to do work that makes us need to look at each other. And of course, that builds up to looking at each other. You know, as we were doing the building and seething, actually what's really risky is starting to look at each other, right? But that's one of the things that really drew me to the work. But in terms of incorporating technology, another aspect of this work that we started really exploring is the whole concept of remix, and using audio, using video, and mashups. Kids are really familiar with those, but incorporating those with this kind of performance work and bringing them together and saying that they're not separate.
And
so
that,
thank you for bringing that up.
That idea that so much of what we're doing as we read is making sense, but then, as Adele said, the remix becomes this kind of combinatorial creativity where we're synthesizing in a different way. We're synthesizing from the world around us as well. Maybe one more, and then we probably want to talk a little bit about the sound things.
I think it's really cool the way it brings in the concept of empathy, and so, I mean, the students in this case would be learning that as well, or anyone who goes through the exercise. And I actually work in management consulting, and I get your laptop point. We very rarely have meetings where that's not the case, and when you're teaching a manager how to give good feedback to somebody and actually putting them in their shoes, and I can see how this could kind of translate to a work setting as well. So it was really interesting.
We talk about this work often as, you know, as we're building this curriculum of empathy, that, you know, this is really about helping. You know, we coach students to step into texts, create a thesis, and then argue for something. And what happens when we start to coach them to step in and live inside, to embody, to feel certain experiences within a text, especially with texts, you know, some of these 19th century before texts that are not so easily accessible anymore. If we feel that we should still be teaching them, we may have to do different work to make them relevant and to help create bridges of understanding. I want to, just because we don't have very much time, hit a couple of points. All of these came out. I mean, we wanted to share a few of the principles of practice that are driving this work. Performance is not simply a way of demonstrating understanding, but it's a way of creating understanding. we didn't show, right? Nobody said, step into this, move into this, and then perform it for each other. We used movement here to start to help us to understand. So it's a different way of thinking about the process of drama in the classroom. The generative power of creative constraints. You know, we're always talking about how, as we approach, if we're reading together, you know, how are we putting on constraints that allow for innovative thinking, that allow for innovative interpretations? And that whole idea, to what was just said, a curriculum of empathy requires a certain kind of embodiment. In our Summer Institute, which is where we've kind of done the most in-depth work around this, what you just experienced might be a part of one day, but over the period of 2 weeks, the players, which is what we rename our teacher and student collaborators, might work with 12 different teaching artists. So someone might, and we work with them to create very customized workshops that get at the ideas of reading differently through different modes, through different media. So what does it mean to read through improv, through voice? You know, Andrea, that's a fabulous workshop in understanding the creature in Frankenstein coming into language through vocal improvisation, you know, coaching into experience. What does it mean to create gestures, to read through movement? We brought in a team of choreographers to work with our players. So each day we brought in visual artists, we brought in a digital artist. Each day they have different engagements with the same text, different ways of helping them explore the text, create questions, but then ultimately think about how do those questions get presented to an audience. So by the end of our second week, it's a crazy, hectic schedule. By the end of our second week, we've got a script and we perform on stage for 300 people. And most of them, as I said before, say it's the most challenging thing we've ever done. I say all of that because we have a few things coming up that I'd like to invite you all to either think about for yourself or for a teacher that you know. The Summer Institute applications close on April 24th. This summer we are tackling Kafka. Maybe not tackling, we are wrestling with Kafka. Typically we say for teachers, we're looking for mid-career teachers, but we haven't set that as a rule. But we're giving priority to teachers with some real experience, 5 years or more. Subject area does not matter. We happen to work with literature now. We've talked about maybe next summer moving into historical texts. But history teachers absolutely apply. If you know someone in the field that you think would like this kind of immersive professional development. There are only 12 spots, so and we had people come from as far as Singapore last summer. So it tends to be fairly competitive. It is a fellowship with a small stipend because after the students leave again, they do some really intensive unpacking in curriculum design. The other piece is we're still taking applications for students. So if you know a high school student who wants this kind of immersive experience, working side by side with adults as collaborators, think about pointing them in the direction as well. So then the other thing, we've got a conference coming up. We've been thinking about what does it mean to take that immersive summer experience and squeeze it into a 2-day immersion with hundreds of people. So far, I mean, we haven't done this yet, but it's coming up in May. So we have this conference we're calling Literacy Unbound, exploring text across multiple modes. We are bringing people from around the country to engage participants in workshops. But then we also, our story of an hour, this was our pilot of Story of an Hour, we'll be breaking people into cohorts to, for 2 days, work with different teaching artists. We actually have a shadow artist who's adapting the elements of Balinese shadow art as a reading device. And we'll be working Story of an Hour for 2 days. Handouts are up there for both of those if you are interested. And check us out on, there's a lot of information on the web. We don't have any time for questions. If you have questions and stuff, come up afterward. But thank you for giving yourself this.